For more than 60 years, Robert Duvall stood as one of Hollywood's most respected figures, a man whose name alone conjured images of integrity, dedication, and unparalleled talent. He wasn't just an actor, he was a craftsman, a master of subtlety, a performer whose every move on screen seemed effortless, yet meticulously honed. Audiences admired him, critics revered him, and colleagues respected him. Yet behind the composed exterior, behind the accolades and the Oscars, there was a side of Duvall the world had never seen, and for decades he remained silent. Not out of fear, but out of principle. Hollywood is a world that thrives on myth-making, where egos are polished for public consumption, where tensions are disguised as camaraderie, and where the stories you read in magazines rarely capture the truth. Duvall, a man of precision and honesty, witnessed these fabrications daily, but he chose to remain an observer, not a commentator. And then came the breaking point. At 94, with decades of achievements behind him, Duvall found himself sitting through a career tribute, a montage of his most iconic moments, each clip paired with glowing commentary, praising the friendships and creative partnerships he had forged. The audience clapped, cheered, and celebrated a version of history that was only half true. What they didn't see were the conflicts simmering beneath the surface, the personal betrayals, the subtle yet destructive acts that shaped the production of some of cinema's greatest films. And it was a quiet moment of revelation for Duvall. Watching the screen, he remembered the actors who had made his work difficult, who had tested his patience and his principles. Memories surfaced of sabotage disguised as genius, rivalry masked as playfulness, and deception hidden behind smiles and polite handshakes. And for the first time, he asked himself a question he had never asked before. Why should the truth remain buried when the stories told for decades were so misleading? This wasn't about bitterness. This was about reality. Duvall had observed Hollywood rewriting itself, turning strained, toxic relationships into tales of friendship and harmony. Generations of actors had been taught to believe that masterpieces emerged from perfect collaboration, but Duvall knew the truth. Chaos, ego, and conflict often forged the most memorable performances. And if that truth was hidden, how could the next generation of actors truly understand the craft, the demands, and the sacrifices behind the magic of the movies? And it was in that moment of reflection that Duvall made a decision that would shake the foundations of Hollywood. He would speak, not to tarnish reputations, not to feed gossip, but to preserve history as it really happened. For the first time in over 60 years, he was ready to lift the veil and name the actors who had left a mark not just on his career, but on the very fabric of the industry itself. Names he revealed would shock audiences and insiders alike. They were not minor disagreements or fleeting misunderstandings. These were relationships so fraught, so destructive, that they had changed the dynamics on set, altered performances, and in some cases, shifted the course of cinematic history. As Duvall prepared to share his truths, he understood the magnitude of what he was about to do. Hollywood thrives on illusion, and illusions are fragile. One honest confession could ripple through the industry like a storm, challenging everything fans and colleagues believed about their heroes. But Duvall's conscience would not allow him to remain silent any longer. This was the moment where a legend known for restraint and discretion began to dismantle the carefully constructed myths of Tinseltown. For decades, Robert Duvall had been the epitome of professionalism, a man who never publicly criticized his peers, a man whose words were measured and thoughtful. Now, at the twilight of his life, he was ready to speak with the blunt honesty that had always defined his craft. Hollywood, long accustomed to polished narratives and heroic myths, was about to witness something entirely different, the unfiltered, raw truth from one of its most revered figures. The stage was set, the audience was unaware, and Robert Duvall, after 60 years of silence, was ready to shatter the illusion. The first name that emerged from Duvall's lips sent a shockwave through Hollywood insiders: Marlon Brando. Brando, hailed as the greatest actor of his generation, a revolutionary force who reshaped the very art of cinema, was a figure almost untouchable in reputation. To the world, he was a genius, charismatic, and transformative. But behind the camera, according to Duvall, the story was far darker. Duvall described Brando as brilliant, yes, but also dangerously self-absorbed. The man could turn a scene into gold, but only if it revolved around him. On the set of The Chase in 1966, Duvall recalled, Brando's ego was a storm that left no one untouched. Takes would unravel for no reason. Subtle gestures would derail other actors, performances, and Brando would often shift his delivery mid-scene, leaving the director and crew scrambling to piece together coherence. What the audience saw as effortless mastery was often a battlefield of control and psychological manipulation. "I admired his talent," Duvall admitted, his voice tinged with a mixture of awe and resentment. But genius does not excuse cruelty. Marlon would sabotage the work of others to prove he could. Crew members would confirm that subtle noises, offhand comments, and even deliberate distractions were tactics Brando used to dominate every frame. The tension wasn't just a matter of artistic differences. It was a clash of wills, a war over respect and power that left Duvall wary of ego-driven actors for decades. Yet Duvall's conflict with Brando was more than just professional. It was a lesson in resilience. Every undermined scene, every ruined take, became part of Duvall's meticulous approach to his craft. He learned to navigate brilliance and arrogance simultaneously, absorbing lessons about control, patience, and the quiet strength required to survive alongside towering personalities. It was admiration and contempt intertwined. N.I.F. Brando revealed the danger of unchecked genius. James Caan revealed the subtle cruelty of competition. On the set of The Godfather, Caan, who played Sonny Corleone, was fiercely competitive, sometimes to the point of malice. Duvall's Tom Hagen was calm, calculating, a foil to Caan's fiery energy. But off-camera, the atmosphere was far from harmonious. NCN would exaggerate gestures, push for focus in scenes meant to highlight Hagen, and employ small, insidious acts to dominate attention. According to Duvall, it was a constant game of chess. Every look, every movement carefully calibrated to assert supremacy. Yet both men were consummate professionals. Despite the simmering tension, they maintained appearances, understanding that the legacy of the film mattered more than personal grievances. "We smiled, we celebrated, we appeared inseparable," Duvall recalled. But behind that facade, we were always measuring each other, always calculating. This was the paradox of Hollywood. Public camaraderie masked private conflict. On screen, Brando and Caan appeared to collaborate effortlessly with Duvall, their chemistry undeniable. But behind the scenes, every interaction was layered with strategy, rivalry, and occasionally resentment. For Duvall, these experiences underscored a truth few admitted. The magic of cinema often emerges not from flawless harmony, but from navigating tension and chaos with precision. NTHE Brando and Caan revelations were more than gossip. They were a glimpse into the crucible of creation, the hidden forces that shape legendary performances. Duvall's willingness to expose these truths challenged the carefully polished narratives audiences had been fed for decades. It forced Hollywood to confront an uncomfortable reality. Brilliance does not guarantee decency, and chemistry on screen often masks conflict off it. In Duvall's telling, genius and rivalry are inseparable forces. Brando taught him that talent can be weaponized. Caan showed that competition can be personal, even cruel, yet still serve the art if managed with discipline. And through it all, Duvall endured, learning not just to act, but to navigate the treacherous waters of Hollywood ego, to survive and thrive amidst chaos, and to carry the lessons quietly until the right moment to speak arrived. If Marlon Brando tested Duvall's patience, and James Caan challenged his focus, Dustin Hoffman struck at the heart of trust. The two had started in the same New York acting circles during the 1960s, sharing cramped apartments and dreams of Broadway and Hollywood glory. What began as friendship, however, devolved into a rivalry that would quietly shape Duvall's career. At first, their competition seemed innocent, a natural push and pull between two ambitious young actors. But according to Duvall, Hoffman crossed an unspoken line. He began borrowing Duvall's work, entire character nuances, delivery styles, and even vocal inflections, presenting them as his own in auditions. "I'd spend weeks crafting a character, only to see him walk in and perform it word for word," Duvall recalled. And when Hoffman secured the role, he'd claim inspiration, masking what Duvall described as theft under the guise of genius. NTHE pattern continued, even as both men entered Hollywood proper. During the making of True Grit in 1969, Duvall had meticulously prepared the role of outlaw Ned Pepper, and Hoffman repeatedly sought advice for his character in Midnight Cowboy. Duvall, ever professional, offered guidance, only to later see Hoffman publicly take credit for work that had originated in their private conversations. The sense of betrayal cut deep. It wasn't competition anymore. It was a calculated erasure of Duvall's contribution. NTHE Final Fracture came when both were considered for the French Connection in 1971, a role that would become iconic and career-defining. According to Duvall, Hoffman allegedly warned the director that Duvall was difficult, citing long-past theater disputes to undermine him. Duvall believed that act cost him the part, a wound that lingered for decades. And yet, in public, both men maintained appearances, smiling for the cameras, praising each other in interviews, giving the world the illusion of mutual respect. Behind that smile, however, was simmering resentment, buried beneath years of forced civility. NIF Hoffman revealed betrayal in friendship. Robert Redford revealed the duplicity of public image. Redford, revered as the embodiment of integrity, a principled star, and the founder of Sundance, appeared untouchable. But Duvall painted a different picture, one of control, calculation, and subtle intimidation. Their collaboration on The Natural in 1984 turned what should have been a seamless partnership into a tense power struggle. Duvall recalled that Redford often treated crew members as invisible cogs and fellow actors as obstacles to be navigated rather than collaborators. On set, he juggled personal business calls, kept the team waiting, and subtly lobbied the director to trim or cut scenes that showcased Duvall's character, Max Mercy, especially when those moments challenged Redford's Roy Hobbs. It wasn't about storytelling, Duvall reflected. It was about control. The irony was brutal. On screen, Redford portrayed a legend haunted by truth, yet off-screen, he manipulated every frame to protect his own image. NTHE defining moment came during post-production, when Duvall confronted Redford about his conduct. According to witnesses, Redford didn't flinch. Instead, he delivered a line that would haunt Duvall for decades. "You're a character actor, Bob. I'm a movie star. We're not playing by the same rules." In that instant, the illusion of Hollywood nobility crumbled. The golden image Redford projected to the world, the activist, the artist, the independent champion, was, at least in Duvall's eyes, a carefully curated facade, one that prioritized influence and ego over genuine collaboration. Duvall's revelations about Hoffman and Redford were more than personal grievances. They exposed a hidden pattern within Hollywood itself. Friendship could be weaponized, mentorship could be exploited, and even legendary figures could act in self-interest while maintaining flawless public personas. These stories, though shocking, were instructive, offering a glimpse into the reality behind the glamour, the chaos behind the art, and the resilience required to navigate it all. NBY sharing these confessions, Duvall not only unsettled myths surrounding two of Hollywood's most beloved stars, but also underscored a painful truth. The magic audiences see on screen is often forged in tension, rivalry, and betrayal. It's a reality seldom acknowledged, yet essential to understanding the true cost of greatness in Tinseltown. The moment Robert Duvall's revelations went public, Hollywood seemed to hold its breath. The industry that thrives on myths, carefully curated images, and polished legacies suddenly found itself confronted with a blunt, uncompromising reality. For decades, Marlon Brando, James Caan, Dustin Hoffman, and Robert Redford had been icons, almost untouchable in public perception. Yet Duvall's words cracked the golden veneer, exposing behaviors and tensions that many had quietly sensed but never dared articulate. Initially, the reaction was disbelief. Press outlets scrambled to report, insiders whispered cautiously, and fans struggled to reconcile the shocking disparity between public persona and private conduct. Representatives for Hoffman and Redford issued carefully measured statements, emphasizing respect for Duvall's career while downplaying the allegations. Diplomacy, however, could not contain the undercurrent of acknowledgement rippling through the corridors of Tinseltown. Behind closed doors, a different narrative emerged. Crew members from The Natural confirmed Redford's exacting demands, recounting hours-long waits on set, manipulations of key scenes, and an insistence on influence over editing and casting. Former assistants and production staff from The Godfather spoke of the palpable tension between Duvall and James Caan, detailing subtle rivalries and the calculated competitiveness that Duvall had described. Even some veterans who had worked with Brando admitted that his brilliance often came at the expense of others, corroborating stories of sabotage and ego-driven disruption. Perhaps most telling was the acknowledgement from peers who had remained silent for years. Several high-profile actors reportedly reached out to Duvall privately, thanking him for articulating what so many had observed but never publicly confronted. In Hollywood, where politeness and image often outweigh honesty, Duvall's courage resonated. He spoke the truth, one insider confided. And in this town, truth is the one thing money can't buy or protect. And For Duvall, the motivation was never revenge or bitterness. At 94, with an Oscar on his shelf, countless nominations, and a legacy few could dispute, he spoke out from a place of responsibility and reflection. He had watched decades of documentaries, retrospectives, and career tributes twist reality, presenting strained, toxic relationships as harmonious collaborations. The breaking point came during a recent tribute to his own career, when montages celebrated moments he had once shared with Brando, Caan, Hoffman, and Redford. The narrator's praise of mutual respect and creative harmony rang hollow. Duvall realized that silence had allowed history to be rewritten, sanitizing the chaos, ego, and betrayal that had shaped some of cinema's most celebrated performances. "I've given 60 years to this industry and treated it with respect," Duvall stated afterward. Part of that respect means being honest about its realities, both the good and the bad. These weren't minor disagreements or passing tensions. They were sustained behaviors that shaped productions and people's livelihoods, and they deserve to be remembered as part of the real history, not the polished version we all pretend to believe. Duvall's reflections also illuminated a fundamental truth about filmmaking itself. The performances audiences idolize are rarely born of perfect harmony. They are forged in tension, fueled by competition, shaped by adversity, and polished through discipline. The chaos, the ego clashes, the quiet battles behind the camera, these are as much a part of cinema's magic as the artistry that graces the screen. NBY confronting the hidden realities, Duvall reframed what it means to witness a classic performance. Admiration for talent need not blind one to flaws. Genius can coexist with cruelty, friendship can coexist with rivalry, and cinematic history is richer and more human for the truths it contains. In exposing the behaviors of Brando, Caan, Hoffman, and Redford, Duvall did more than air grievances. He challenged Hollywood itself to reckon with the fragile line between myth and reality, between legend and lived experience. In the wake of his interview, the industry was left to reflect. Some felt discomfort, others relief, and many found validation in finally seeing the unvarnished truth acknowledged. For Robert Duvall, the act of speaking was not just confession, it was preservation. He had lifted the veil, offered clarity, and reminded the world that behind every iconic film lies a story far more complicated than the audience ever sees. As the dust settled from Robert Duvall's revelations, the true impact of his words began to crystallize. This was not a simple airing of grievances. It was a reckoning, a rare glimpse into the machinery of Hollywood, where glitz and glamour often conceal tension, ego, and personal conflict. For over 60 years, Duvall had quietly navigated these waters, balancing professionalism with artistic integrity, all while witnessing firsthand how ambition and self-interest could overshadow collaboration. NTHE reactions were immediate and complex. Some insiders lauded his honesty, describing it as a courageous act that stripped away the polished myths surrounding some of cinema's greatest legends. Others bristled, uncomfortable with the implication that the stars they idolized were, behind closed doors, just as human, flawed, ambitious, and occasionally ruthless as anyone else. But for Duvall, the intent was never to tarnish reputations. It was to restore balance, to remind the industry and its audiences that the stories we tell about art and artists often omit the struggle, conflict, and chaos that birthed them. Beyond the scandal, there was a lesson in resilience. Duvall's career, defined by discipline and commitment, demonstrates how an actor can endure, adapt, and even thrive amid difficult personalities and challenging dynamics. While Brando's brilliance often masked cruelty, Kahn's competitiveness fueled tension, Hoffman's betrayals tested loyalty, and Redford's control challenged collaboration, Duvall maintained his integrity. He carved out a legacy not by outshining others, but by mastering his craft with consistency and focus, showing that true artistry requires both talent and perseverance. And yet, there is a subtler truth underlying his confessions. Hollywood, as Duvall portrays it, is a world of dual realities: the public image, carefully constructed for media and fans, and the private reality, shaped by human ambition and frailty. In revealing the discrepancy between the two, Duvall invites the next generation of actors to navigate the industry with awareness. "These young actors need to know the truth," he said. "Even the most celebrated films aren't born from perfection. Sometimes they're forged in chaos, ego, and pain." NHI's confessions also serve as a cautionary tale about myth-making in Hollywood. For decades, documentaries, retrospectives, and career tributes had simplified history, portraying relationships as harmonious collaborations, when in reality they were often fraught with silent battles and concealed animosities. By naming Brando, Caine, Hoffman, and Redford, Duvall not only set the record straight about his own experiences, but also challenged the industry's reliance on illusion over truth. It is a reminder that behind the magic of cinema lies labor, negotiation, and human imperfection, and that these realities deserve acknowledgement alongside the applause. And ultimately, Duvall's revelations are as much about preserving his legacy as they are about exposing Hollywood's contradictions. He emerges not as a bitter critic, but as a witness, a guardian of truth who has spent decades observing, learning, and surviving. In doing so, he teaches a profound lesson: admiration for art does not require blind reverence for the people who create it. Respect for craft and honesty about reality can coexist, and understanding the human complexities behind cinematic legends only deepens our appreciation for the work itself. And as the interview concluded, Duvall hinted that his list of 4 was not exhaustive. "These 4 stood out," he said quietly, "but they weren't the only ones. Hollywood's always been better at making myths than facing realities. Maybe it's time for a little more reality." In those words lies both a promise and a warning. The full story of Tinseltown, its brilliance, chaos, betrayals, and triumphs, is far richer and more complicated than the public narrative suggests. And for those willing to look behind the curtain, Robert Duvall has offered a rare, unflinching window into the real heart of Hollywood.